You're listening to From the Chair, and I'm your host, Mike Hamilton. Join us each episode as we talk to athletic directors from across America. We're going to talk about topics like leadership, career development, issues of the day, and I can promise you we're going to have some fun along the way too. So sit back, listen in, and let's dive in. Let's go. I am really looking forward to this conversation today. My friend, Dr. Candice Lee, the Director of Athletics at Vanderbilt University. Candice, thanks for being with me today.
Thanks for having me, Mike, and it's good to see you.
Well, you know, I was joking off the air with you. It's kind of ironic that we're doing this over the air when our offices are literally maybe a quarter of a mile apart, I think.
Maybe.
Something like that. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know who are listening, my office with Learfield, it's actually here in Nashville on West End Avenue, and it's just right down the street from Vanderbilt, and the good work that Candice and all of her colleagues are doing there on campus. So it is good to be with you. You know, Candice, I told you offline, I've got a number of topics that I feel like I could cover with you, and I know you've got a lot to share that folks will enjoy hearing. And I'm going to talk a lot about Vanderbilt and your career there, but I also have a couple of more overarching industry type things that I want to talk about too. So if you're okay, I want to just go ahead and dive in if that's all right.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, recently, obviously there's some outcomes in the Austin versus NCAA case that allowed conferences to sort of set the standards and determine methodology and criteria for how educational related benefits and such would be distributed to student athletes. And the SEC chose to let those decisions reside at the campus level. And I think that that's an interesting proposition. I think it's a signaling somewhat of how maybe we're trying to decentralize some of the activity in NCAA athletics as almost a foreshadowing of some of the other things that we may see later in the fall and over the course of the next year or so with the NCAA Constitution Committee, right? So just high-level comments on your thoughts about not necessarily the Austin case, but why you think the SEC felt it's important to do this at the campus level. And am I reading it right? Is this a signaling of maybe the kind of thing the future is going to look like with the NCAA?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Mike, that this potentially could be a signal that decisions like these will be decentralized and will be pushed down from the conference level to individual institutions. But I think the biggest takeaway is that as a league, one, we recognize, so just specifically talking about Austin, we recognize the importance of providing educational benefits and rewarding academic achievement. And the idea that each institution can do it in the way that they think best, I think that's just a nod to the fact that, we are certainly united in our philosophy of supporting young people, but we have different ways of doing it on our campus. And that it's okay for things like that to be localized decisions. So that way you are actually doing it in the way that best suits your department. So I think that's the biggest takeaway.
Yeah. And so this decision is fresh. I'm not exactly sure when our episode will run. Are there thoughts at this point as to where Vanderbilt's going to sit in this and in terms of how you might utilize this opportunity, or is it still too early?
I mean, I think it's early for us to say with certainty we are going to do it. And not only are we going to do it, but we're excited about it because we think it absolutely aligns with who we are. And so I think that we may find that we'll prioritize graduation and rewarding graduation. And this is just about the cash component, but it's possible that we may have a hybrid approach. And then as far as the non-cash educational benefits, we've been doing much of that already. And so we think that's a point of strength for us. So, I love the direction because I think anything we can do to support graduation and academic achievement, particularly in this climate, I think it's really important.
Yeah, no doubt. So let's talk about Vanderbilt and Candice Lee and your career, because there are a lot of different ways that folks ascend to athletic director chairs, and so many different iterations, right? And for you
Right.
in particular, you came to Vanderbilt as a student athlete. You were a letter winner, a captain, have 3 degrees on your wall from Vanderbilt University. I know you take great pride in that, as you should. You've worked in the Vanderbilt athletic department for your entire athletic administration career. If I remember correctly, Candice, now here's the irony in this to me in some ways. Didn't you grow up in a military family? So you moved around a lot growing up,
Hmm.
and then now your career, as it were, has been very, very much, there stable at Vanderbilt. And so, for those Kevin White's bio, for example, he's been AD at a number of schools, right? Moved around the country. His family moved around the country. Talk about the advantages of being at a place like Vanderbilt for the length of the time that you've had there,
Hmm.
understanding the role that Vanderbilt plays in the scope of college athletics, and how you understand it by being a graduate, three-time graduate, but also how now that you're athletic director, making sure that you have to go about filling any gaps that you might have from not having experienced life in the athletic director world, administration world, from other schools. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, happy to. So first, you're right. I did grow up in a military family and um, moved around quite a bit. And I think upon reflection, that may be part of why I felt, when I came to Vanderbilt and started to kind of carve out my own path, I really felt such a strong sense of community and a chance to really put down some roots. I don't know that I did it consciously, but in looking back on it, I do think that that was a factor. You never know where life is going to take you. I did not come to Vanderbilt thinking I would be here, nearly 30 years later. But I would say that having been in this same community for so long, I think it has. There's a couple things. One, I believe in the values that Vanderbilt espouses. I think when I think about us as a high academic institution in a premier conference in a great city, that it provides such a unique perspective. And that's certainly no disrespect to, there's so many wonderful universities out there. But I think even as a teenager, I understood that there was something special about Vanderbilt and the impact that we could have, particularly if we got everything aligned correctly and actually maximized our potential. And the thing that has kept me here so long, far before I knew I was going to be the athletic director, is that there's great potential here. I think having been here so long and then ascending to the chair, I had a really good idea of what our gaps were. But I also have high self awareness, and I know that there's a lot of value that comes from going to different institutions. And, I had opportunities to go to other institutions, and it just so happened that at those given moments, or other positions, but in those given moments, you make decisions for yourself, for your family. It was always just best for me to stay at Vanderbilt at that particular time. But I knew, and I don't have regrets, but I knew that there were just certain experiences I did not have. So, one of the things that was important to me after becoming the athletic director a little more than a year ago, I have been blessed to have a great network, great mentors. I certainly count you among that group, Mike, who've just been so beneficial and helpful to me. But I knew that I needed um, some additional experience at my side. I got Vanderbilt, so I know that,
Yeah,
and I have
yeah.
relationships internally. But as I thought about the structure and what I thought we needed to move forward, I hired two deputy athletic directors, both of which, and a couple things for me. One, I wanted them to be people that certainly I knew of and had great reputations and great work ethics, but I didn't want it to be someone that I knew personally, because I thought it was really important that there was nothing there that would color their ability to just come in, have fresh perspective, and fully commit to the transformation that we needed to have. I ended up with Tommy McClellan and Dr. Christine Kelly. They are both fantastic leaders. They both have been athletic directors before. And I thought if I could find that, that would be like icing on the cake. I thought that was important too, to have people who understood what it's like to be in this seat. And, I know enough to know that while I have confidence in my thoughts and my style and where we need to go, I also needed strong people around me. And that's not to say that we didn't already have strong people here, because we do. We did and we do. But I thought that those were two pieces that were really, really important for me as we moved forward.
I really resonate with that, particularly the fact that you hired two who had been in the athletic director chair, and interestingly, those who you did not know before. I did not know that particular piece of the puzzle. If I go back and review my time as athletic director, lots of learning lessons, right? Lots of scar tissues, all those kind of things. But I think when we were at our best, when I was athletic director, I had a team around me who were not afraid to challenge thought and
That's
who
right.
would speak in and make great suggestions, and that cadence becomes important. In fact, one of my senior associate ads, a guy named Gary Wyant, just died recently. He was in his
Oh,
80s, but when I was in the chair and I was in my 40s and he was in his 60s, and a lot of folks probably outside of University of Tennessee might not even recognize that name, but I can promise you he was the guy. In many ways, we were dealing with coaching searches and internal issues and recruiting and compliance and academics and operations. We were behind closed doors. He was a trusted ally, right? And when you ascend to an AD role, there are a lot of people, uh, most days, that want to tell you all the things that you're doing right or blow smoke your way or whatever. But
right.
I think one of the shortcomings that athletic directors can have is to not have those around them who will speak truth and who can
Hmm.
provide trusted feedback, right?
I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think about when I was a deputy athletic director and I spent, most of that time working for David Williams. And then I also worked with Malcolm Turner for the year that he was here. And in both cases, I tried to provide that, right? Just a safe space, a space to throw things on the wall and give authentic feedback. And at the end of the day, like, I will respect the decisions that were made, but I didn't think that I was doing my job if I didn't, bring my best self to the role and be honest. And it just, it makes me think, like, I miss David Williams for a lot of reasons. But one of the things I wish I could do is tell him, gosh, I hope I helped you as much as I thought I did.
Yeah.
Because now I recognize the importance of that role even more so, now, since becoming athletic director.
So many recollections of great conversations with David through the years. And in particular, for some reason, he and I rode back from Birmingham at an SEC meeting to Nashville together one time in a car. And we got into a long discussion just about the power of secondary education. And he shared a lot of experiences from Detroit, and his time there. And one of the most bright people I've ever been around, and thoughtful. And I know he was a very much a mentor of yours. And
Yes.
what do you think really, as you think reflect on David's life, and unfortunately he passed much too early, um,
Yes.
his greatest influence on who you are today as an athletic director?
And I think, I mean, gosh, we could do a whole podcast just about that. But
Yeah.
I would say that there were many, many things I respected about David. One of them being that he never ever lost sight of the commitment to student athletes. I think we all say that, right? We say we're in the business because we support student athletes and student athletes come first, but I feel certain that we all mean it when we say it. But I watched him live it out every day, even when it wasn't popular, even when it took more time. I mean, he truly was committed, and we always knew that we were here to serve student athletes, and I really appreciate that. He also did what he thought was best, despite noise or what other people thought.
Yeah.
He was not easily influenced, and I actually I think that's a great strength. And I watched him. That's about integrity, and I think that those were probably two of the biggest things. Well, I would mention another one in that he was also very committed to his family. And so, even though he was the busiest person I'd ever seen and overcommitted in so many ways, said yes to everything. So, was always running around, calendar was full, but you always knew that his family came first. And I respect that. I respect that. He was a deeply principled person. And those are just some of the things that I think I learned from him that influenced the way that I go about my business.
Well, and just for what it's worth, I can see that in the way you live out your life. So
Thank
he's
you.
had an influence there for sure. And I'd say this, and I say this, I probably ought to say it in a lighthearted way because to make my point, but he would fight you over the student athlete, right? I mean, that
Oh no.
That's he. When it came time to talk about issues around student athletes, you knew David Williams was going to have some commentary, and it was going to be powerful and meaningful, and it was going to be very protective of student athletes. And so
That's
that's
right.
one of the things that I always respected so much about his time there on your campus. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so two or three things. This sort of ties together, Candice. I was thinking about the fact, I've been in the state now almost 30 years and have lived in Nashville for 10 years and have been able to watch Vanderbilt over that time, have tremendous respect for Vanderbilt athletics, tremendous respect for a university. And there have been ebbs and flows, and competitively as there are at every schools. Um,
Mhm.
for me, anyway, observation at leadership, from a leadership perspective, it appears from the outside looking in that you have a chancellor now who really is at least verbalizing a understanding at the highest level of what it means to have a successful athletic program and how that's integrated into the broader academic mission of the university, and seems to be supporting that. I'd like to know,
Mhm.
that's real and how that's playing out for you. And, to tap in, to add to that question, if I could, you're obviously sitting in an interesting place by being the only private institution in a conference of heavyweight state institutions, and how that affects what your chancellor is talking to you about and how you guys go about your business. And I'm gonna dive a little bit more into how you view your competition and that kind of thing in just a minute. But first is,
Okay.
your perspective on my comments about what I see from your chancellor at this point.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about Daniel Deermeyer because I think that I have said to anyone who will listen that he will be transformational for this university. And certainly that includes athletics. So what you see is actually what is happening. Now, he is a
Yeah.
tremendous partner. He is sincerely invested in, you know, he's invested in excellence, right? So when we think about, he's a uber talented guy who I'm certain has had the opportunity to be a president or chancellor at many, many places. But he was drawn to Vanderbilt because of the standards of excellence. And one of the first things that he said is that, if you're going to be an excellent university, you have to be excellent in everything, right? So it's not on brand for us to not invest in certain areas. And athletics is clearly, I would say, the most visible at times, right? And so, and he understands the value that athletics brings. He understands the power from an engagement standpoint and a tradition standpoint and an educational standpoint, right? Just to name a few. And from the very beginning, I was appointed interim AD under Susan Wente, who is now the president at Wake Forest University. She was the interim chancellor at the time. But I was hired by Daniel Deermeyer, and he made it clear to me from the very beginning that there would be, so he likes to say, no daylight between us. And that's not meant to say he's a micromanager and he's got, it means that we are partners. He
Yeah.
he is a leader that believes in partnership and collaboration. He calls it radical collaboration. And I feel just, I know it is really a tremendous privilege and it's a blessing to have a president or chancellor who understands the value that athletics brings. He provides resources in every way, including with his time. And I mean, what you see is absolutely what's happening, right? It's not, I get asked this question a lot, and I make it a point not to look backwards. So people say, like, why now? Well, what changed? And what, you know this, and everybody who's listening knows this, that these worlds are very complex, and there
Yeah.
are multiple conditions that contribute to success or lack thereof, right? And it just so happens that the conditions are right for us right now. And it starts at the very top with our chancellor. We have an incredibly engaged board of trust. We've got new leadership in key positions, and just I really feel greatly that it is our time, and he is
Yeah.
a big, big part of that. Big part of
Yeah. So how is that playing out in real time, right? I get the leadership, the philosophy, those kind of things.
Mhm.
Obviously, you guys recently announced this Vandy United campaign where you're committed to facility enhancements and those kind of things. I'm imagining it might play out in resource allocation. I don't know
Right.
about academic support. How is it manifesting itself in real time in terms of his vision for where athletics plays in the broader narrative?
Yeah, so I can give you a few examples. Certainly you mentioned Vanderbilt or Vandy United, which is our $300 million fundraising facility campaign. The university has given us a third of the money, so $100 million investment from the university is included in that. That is a tangible example of the support. I think if last weekend we had a home football game, and the chancellor and I were attended a tailgate together and met with a men's basketball recruit. Like that, the physical presence of showing up and investing time. There's another tangible example. I was blown away. There was a point this past academic year when we had a meeting with the faculty senate, and one of the questions posed, and we have a good relationship with the faculty senate, but there's some sort of natural tension, right? That sometimes that you see between academics and athletics. And there was a question posed by a professor about, it was tied to whether or not we should be playing games during COVID and questioning some of the protocols. And this is very valid, right? We're in the middle of a global pandemic, and particularly a year ago when we're still trying to figure out so many things, right? And so, we're on Zoom, of course, and I go to unmute to address the question, and Chancellor Dearmeyer says, "Candice, let me start. Let me take this, and then I'll kick it to you." And for the next 8 or 9 minutes, he proceeded to talk about, this commitment that we've made as a university to bring students back to campus. And we are deeply committed to our undergraduate residential experience, and we're deeply committed to our core mission of educating students and doing research in the labs. And these are core elements of who we are. Well, so is athletics.
Yeah.
And so we made this commitment to bring everyone back so that you could work on your craft and be in your element. Well, athletics is not to be excluded from that. And to hear that from the very top, right? And to hear him talk that way in front of, parents during family weekend, or donors, or recruits, or fans, or faculty. I mean, it just sets a different tone. And, I deeply believe in that too, right? So, the best thing for me is that we are not acting, right? You don't have to pretend. Like, there is real synergy there, and the values are the same. And so we we texted this morning very early, and just knocked out a couple things. We meet on a regular basis. We had finally were able to have our first in-person full staff meeting, right? So not on Zoom, 180 plus people in the same room. We were masked, we were safe. But I asked Chancellor Dearmeyer if he would come over and if he would open up our meeting. And again, that's just an example, but to have the chancellor come over and talk about our partnership, and hear, and for our team to hear, right, that we matter and we're valued, and we're going to help this university reach its potential. We play a vital role in that. I mean, that is tremendous.
Yeah. That's great to hear. It's great to hear. Let's talk about coaches for just a second. I told you I wanted to ask you about Tim Corbin. Vanderbilt has had a number of successful coaches through the years in different sports. I think about Eddie Fogler in basketball. I think about Jim Foster in women's basketball. I think about James Franklin in football, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Tim Corbin has set an incredible standard for success at Vanderbilt, really nationally, candidly, in the sport of baseball. And he's been there a long time, and I'm sure there have been folks that have tried to pull him away here or there or whatever. But you've worked with Tim a long time, and I just would love to hear from you. What makes Tim Corbin tick and has led to his success at Vanderbilt University?
Oh man, I'm glad that you brought up Tim Corbin, and I would add to your list. I mean, I think he has differentiated himself not just in baseball, but really in all of college sports. I mean, I think he is one of the best to just do it. Period. right?
Yeah.
So gosh, there's a lot I want to say. I think about Tim and his success and the growth of our baseball program as like the ideal template, right? Because, when I was a student athlete here, baseball was not successful like it is now. And that's no disrespect to the coaches that we had in the past, but it was not nearly at the level that Tim has gotten it to. And I think about the transformation of that program, and it starts with hiring the right person. So the right person was hired, resources and support given to him, and then people got out of his way
Yeah.
and let that magic take place. And without any shortcuts, there was runway and time to build it the right way. I mean, there's so many things that are special about Tim, but he's very clear about who he is and how to maximize potential in people. I mean, he is an educator. I mean, first, he uses baseball as the way to do it, but he is an educator, and he's deeply committed in leading people. I was going to say young men, but it's not just young men, it's everybody who comes in his midst. He this idea of maximizing human potential, which we talk a lot about at Vanderbilt. I mean, he is like the perfect illustration of that. And he is teaching people how to make a difference and use their talents. And so, we all of us who are in Tim's midst learn from Tim. I think he is a tremendous leader. He believes in Vanderbilt and the what makes us unique. He doesn't see who we are being, like you mentioned earlier, being the only private school, being the smallest school. He doesn't see those as constraints. It's an opportunity for him to transform. What he's done in the baseball program, we want to do across the board. And that's one of the things that I think, in the chair that I sit in, it's like I feel like my task is to ensure that we stay at the top in baseball and make sure that Tim has what he needs, while also bringing our other sports up, right? And that both of those are so important. And again, we have other sports that have done really well, so it's not like all our other sports, but I'm just trying to, just in speaking generally, that he has set such a high bar and set such a great tone. And you're right, other people, I mean, people would be crazy not to want him,
Yeah.
right? But we'd
Yeah.
be crazy not to keep him.
Yeah.
And it's not keeping, though. He's here because he chooses Vanderbilt. We choose each other, and he understands what we can be. He's showing you what we can be. And
Yeah.
it's just amazing. I mean, we've got 3 coaches this year who are first-time head coaches. And I've said to each of them, although they already knew it, that you've got right across the street a man who is the best in the business. And, it's a tremendous resource that's available to you. But what's even greater is that he wants to be that resource. So, he is fully invested in this department. And I mean, he's a dynamic person. And also, just his fibers are so pure. He's a good man. He's a great coach, but he's a great man. And I
Mm.
and I think that's the highest compliment that you can pay.
That's rich content. Schools are fortunate when they have success, but to have someone who's had sustained success and to be the kind of person and the kind of coach you're talking
That's
about, it's a blessing, right? And I,
it is.
you hope that along the way, young staff and old can learn from the experiences to see what did success look like. Now, look, there's some parts of Tim Corbin's success that are germane to Tim Corbin, and
That's
someone will
right.
never be able to capture that, right? But it's the things
Absolutely.
around that you learn. Like I liken it to the time that I had with Pat Summit, right? There'll never be another Pat Summit, and I look back on those days and go, wow, did what did we really learn, and did we look and listen and all those kinds of
Right.
things. Tim Corbin is that type of person for Vanderbilt, so
I
I
agree.
appreciate you kind of letting folks know a little bit more about him. Um, hey, look, I've got a bunch more to talk about, as you know. So we're gonna have to do a Candice 2.0, right? In order
Okay.
to be sensitive to your time constraints. Um, I did want to. I do want to end on a little bit more serious note before I do a couple of fun things. I've told you in advance I was going to ask this question. Um, for me, there are a number of issues in our country that I think we're dealing with. Obviously, we've got the pandemic, we've got mental health issues that folks are dealing with, part of the pandemic and not, right? Political unrest, whatever. But I want to talk about race relations just for one moment. And this is probably not going to do it the right service in terms of time, but athletics has always been a place that provides a rallying place around serious subjects, and it's been a place where people have been able to lay down differences and come together for a common theme, and on a Saturday afternoon or a Tuesday night lay things aside that are difficult in our world and cheer for the Commodores or cheer for the Tigers or whomever, right? And I I I ask you in advance of this if you wouldn't mind commenting on just your perspective. You view this through a different lens than I do, right? Your view on has athletics, college athletics specifically, what have we done right coming out of some of the issues in our country with the George Floyd incident last summer, and what is left to be done? And I know that's not fair based on the time we have left, but I'm just curious as to your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that, I've got some, guess it's fair to say, some mixed feelings around, we tend to talk about this, and I mean this respectfully because I do understand how you phrase a question and why you phrase it that way, but we tend to talk about this issue sort of post George Floyd, right?
Yeah.
Because there was such an appropriate response to George Floyd being murdered. And it felt like suddenly there was pressure to make statements and to talk about issues that, quite frankly, have been plaguing us for a very long time. And so, when I say the mixed reaction is more to, the issues that we find ourselves dealing with relative to race relations in sports and in this country are not new issues, right? They are not new issues. I suppose we should feel thankful that the one of the outcomes, since last summer is that there's more of a focus on it. But sadly, incidents like what happened to Mr. Floyd are not new either.
Yeah.
And I do think that we have a hugely visible, powerful platform in athletics to raise awareness, and like you noted earlier, athletics at times I think has done a tremendous job of that. But I think when we look at the work that needs to be done, and of course I get asked this question a lot because I'm a Black woman sitting in this chair, and there are not a lot of people that look like me that get the opportunity to sit in this chair. And every time I talk about this, it's important for me to say that, the question is why there's not more diversity in the chair, right? It's not because there are not qualified people.
Yeah.
Because I mean that's just not true. That's
exactly
not
right.
true. That's not true. And you hear people say things like, man, I'm so proud of Vanderbilt for having the courage to hire you. I've heard that, a lot. And at Vanderbilt, we've had a Black athletic director since 2003, uninterrupted since 2003. People don't talk about that. I don't know that takes courage. I think that was, David Williams was very qualified. Malcolm Turner had a tremendous resume, was qualified. And I'm not tooting my own horn, but I think I earned the right to be in the seat. Well, there are other people like us, right? And so the question is why?
Yes.
Right? It's not a pipeline issue. It is because if we're going to use the word courage, there is a lack of courage to give opportunities to people that don't fit status quo. And I think, that is clearly a concern, but it's even further a concern when you look at, but the same people that were cheering on Saturdays, a lot of those young men and women are people of color. And so, I think we have to ask ourselves, what are the questions, like what are the messages that we're sending when we say it is okay for you to play? and for you to entertain us. It is not okay for you to lead. And until we can like seriously answer that question and be honest about it, then athletics hasn't done enough. So that would be my, and I
Yeah.
say that as someone who is very thankful to be in the seat and
Yeah.
understands how important it is and understands how important representation is. But I
Yeah.
do think we've got to be really, really honest, right, about these being historical concerns that just really they have not changed that much.
As they say in the South, that will preach, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that will preach, right? And I share a personal concern for this, given the makeup of my own personal family, and so I really appreciate you sharing those thoughts. And I do think there's been progress, but
Yes, there has.
there's a lot of progress yet to be made. And your example and your leadership is very much appreciated. And
Thank you.
I know you don't like to necessarily consider yourself a pioneer in that regard, but I think the success you've had and the success that you will have, I know will be looked at as being instrumental in continuing that narrative, right? So,
Thank you.
yeah. So let's go out on just a couple of quick fun notes, okay? If we could.
Okay.
Um, if you were not an athletic director, what would Candice Lee be doing?
This is a great question. I probably would be a teacher. I used to say lawyer, but like I don't. I mean, that would require more school, and I'm like not doing
You're
that.
done with
So I
school, right?
think I'd probably be a teacher or doing something in like a nonprofit somewhere, or and maybe in like a helping profession. That'd probably be something like that.
If someone looked at your Spotify list or your iPhone music, what would they be surprised to see?
Oh, so I've got two playlists that I use in my office because there's always music in my office. I mean, I try to keep it low enough that it's not disruptive if I'm having a meeting. But like I was meeting with one of our head coaches yesterday, and during the time that she was in here, I think like Megan the Stallion came on, then Stevie Wonder, then like Journey, then so I mean I've got a a fairly eclectic playlist, but I love music and I love to have it on in the background. So.
Yeah, same here. So we've mentioned the influence of David Williams in your life as a mentor. Is there a female mentor that you would call out as being influential in your life and your career?
Oh, I mean so many. I mean I will always talk about David Williams and he was more than just a ment. I mean, he was also my friend, and just really important in my life. So both personally and professionally, he and his wife Gail. Um, I for me it starts with my parents
Yeah.
because my father's a retired colonel in the Army. My mother was a public affairs officer at NASA who retired a couple years ago, and they both just have incredible stories, and they're both so strong and resilient and were pioneers in their own right. And so my father was one of 11 children and the first in his family to go to college, and retired as a lieutenant colonel and just has an incredible story. And my mother started at NASA as a secretary and retired as a public affairs officer.
Mm,
And, was one of the few that looked like her in her role. And I mean, I just have awesome parents who, from a very, very young age, said you can do anything, even if the world tells you you can't, don't worry about it.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it starts for me with my parents. And then I'm also blessed enough to have just an incredible husband who is a really just a tremendous leader and man. And I mean, I know I can tell you about a ton of mentors because I have a ton. Carla Williams is one. She's awesome. I mean, I can tell you, but if my time is short, then I got to mention my parents and my husband.
Yeah, that's good. All right, last two. If you had the opportunity to acquire a new superpower, and I know you have many already, but what would be the superpower that you would want to acquire?
Oh, I would want to become invisible, like just on demand.
That's a great one. That's a great one for an athletic director, right?
Oh
Yeah.
yes, and I mean, I would not abuse my superpower, but gosh, it would come in handy sometimes. Just
Yeah. So last thing, you and I are fortunate to live in an unbelievable city. And one of the things that for some reason we've become known for in the last 3 or 4 years is Nashville hot chicken, right? So I've got to ask you, Prince's, Hattie B's, Bolton's, for anybody that's visiting Nashville, which I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast will come at some time or another. What's Candice Lee's go-to recommendation on Nashville hot chicken?
so if somebody that knows me is listening to this, they're gonna be like, "Don't lie, because you know you don't eat spicy food." So like I don't really eat hot chicken, but I have tried. I've been to Bolton's, I've been to Hattie B's, I've been to Prince's, and my stomach really cannot take it. But I will tell you that of that I recommend Prince's every
Okay, there you
time.
go.
It's like no disrespect to the many other places here, but I will say, despite it making me cry because it was so hot, it was also just really good chicken. And so
Yeah.
I support. I would say Princess.
Well, as you know, that's going old school. That's the
That's right.
Princess is many times the original that sort of set the trend, right? So
Yeah,
I'm
and
going to wrap up
sometimes
with.
it's the original that gets slighted. So I mean, I got to give a shout out to Princess because they deserve that.
That's right. That's right. Well, you know what I'm getting ready to do? I'm getting ready to wrap with you, and I'm getting ready to head down to your office, to your conference room in Magoogan, and eat Hattie B's with our Ticket Solutions staff.
Well,
So,
very good, and enjoy. I mean, certainly no disrespect to Hattie B's.
Candice, this has been great. I really want to thank you for being with me today.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Always a pleasure. A great friend, great athletic director, one of the best in the business. You've been listening to the director of athletics at Vanderbilt University, Dr. Candice Storey Lee, and I'm your host from the chair, Mike Hamilton. We look forward to seeing you next time.